From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. Israel and Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire in Lebanon, a deal announced by President Biden at the White House today. We'll have more with Ned Lazarus of George Washington University. Donald Trump threatening new tariffs on the U.S.'s three largest trading partners, suggesting new levies on China, Canada, and Mexico to crack down on the flow of migrants and drugs over the border. We'll get reaction this hour from Nazak Nikakhtar, who worked in the trade area of the Commerce Department during the first Trump administration, and we'll focus on the potential impact on energy costs with Bob McNally of Rapidan Energy. But we begin this evening with President Biden announcing today a 60-day ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah following weeks of diplomacy. Here he is from the Rose Garden at the White House this afternoon.
Under the deal reached today, effective at 4 a.m. tomorrow local time, the fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border will end. Will end. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities.
For more, I'm joined by Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko and Michael McKee here in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Michelle, he says that this is a 60-day agreement that, as we just heard, is intended to turn into something more. But how hard will that be at the end of these 60 days when he will no longer be president of the United States?
Yeah, designed to be permanent is what he said there. And that's kind of language mimicking what they've said for about a year now in trying to get ceasefires on other fronts of this war and this conflict. And so, yeah, it's very tentative. You can see how there are benefits to all sides here. I mean, Lebanon clearly being barraged as well with strikes from Israel, a fifth of its population displaced. Israel wanting to focus more on Iran and Hamas in Gaza, and the U.S. desperately wanting to get some sort of deal, especially to get those hostages out. So there are reasons for, celebrating a small tentative victory, but certainly emphasis on tentative, isn't it?
Well, and when we consider the potential implications for the conflict with Hamas, many people I've spoken with today have suggested these are two separate conflicts. While they may have some common denominators, that is not necessarily easily done once you stop the fighting with Hezbollah to stop the fighting in Gaza.
Right. And yes, they are two separate conflicts, as you mentioned. But also Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioning that this gives them a chance to kind of reinforce their troops and focus more on the southern front there. So that is the hope of the Israeli side and, of course, the U.S. as well.
And this is the news that we've gotten today, but we got news last night as well from the president-elect Donald Trump, who took to Truth Social to announce he's threatening to put in place an additional 10% tariff on all goods from China and 25% on all products coming into the U.S. from Mexico and Canada, to which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau quickly called him about, and he spoke to reporters about that conversation earlier today.
I had a good call with Donald Trump last night again. We obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how the intense and effective connections between our two countries flow back and forth. We talked about some of the challenges that we can work on together. It was a good call.
This is all sounding a little familiar, Mike McKee, to what we experienced during the first Trump administration. Many today are suggesting this could just be an opening move intended to be a negotiation. But if these tariffs were to become a reality, what would the economic impact be?
Oh, the economic impact would be huge, which is why you wonder if he really means it or if this is some kind of pressure tactic. Canadians have already said they'll up their presence at the northern border and try to work harder on keeping people from crossing the border into the United States. And maybe that's what Donald Trump wants. But if you look at what his remedy is, it would cause untold calamity in markets, not just in the United States, but in Mexico and in Canada. There's so much stuff that goes back and forth. And I've used this example all day of auto parts, $40 billion worth. Some of them cross the borders 6-7 times before they get put into a car. So how do you know what's going to be tariffed? Vegetables. We get 90% of our avocados from Mexico. We get 2/3 of our tomatoes. So what are we going to do about that? Are we just going to, raise prices on American consumers or stop buying them, stop them at the border? There's a lot of things that don't make sense about this proposal. So maybe it's just a pressure tactic.
But it also could just be a starting point, right, Michelle? He said additional tariffs on China, which suggests there could be others layered in.
Additional tariffs on top of additional tariffs is kind of how he put it in his Truth Social post last night. Yeah, this is typical Trump. I mean, I think no one should be surprised by this who was around for Trump 1.0 or looks back on how this played out then or has read or heard about his book, The Art of the Deal. This is exactly how he lays out his negotiating tactic. He wants to get out in front. He wants to have the leverage, and he wants to bring people to the table and force them, as you've seen from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, to engage on the matter. And this really does marry a few of his favorite talking points on immigration, on fentanyl, on trade, and by association on taxes, because he's saying tariffs will help pay for his tax cut plans.
Well, and on tariffs and taxes, there will be other players in this game in his administration, like his nominee for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, presumably Howard Lutnick for Commerce, and today Bloomberg reporting Kevin Hassett to direct the National Economic Council. They all could play a role in here.
They could all play a role. Kevin Hassett, traditional conservative with traditional conservative views of what the economy should do, free trade and things like that, who put those aside to be CEA chair in Trump's first term. Now he's going to be head of the National Economic Council, and he'll be the one who's supposed to be the referee among all these other competing officials in the administration. I thought it was interesting yesterday that markets got so excited because Scott Bessent had a 3+3+3 plan to cut the deficit down to 3%, raise growth to 3%, and taxes as well. The problem is he doesn't have any authority over any of that. It's all housed in the Oval Office, basically. I mean, Russ Vaught over at the Office of Management and Budget will play a big role in what the spending and deficits are. But this all comes down to the same thing that we saw, as Michelle said, in the first term. It's all about Trump and what he wants. And this is his style. There's no reason he couldn't have gotten on the phone and called Justin Trudeau and said, hey, we need some help with this here. But instead, he does it this way. He knows we'll pick up on the tweets and we'll amplify it. And then everybody in Canada will have a heart attack and everybody in Mexico will have a heart attack. And he might get some results.
Why do in private what you could do in public? Bloomberg's Michael McKee and Michelle Jamrisko. Thank you both so much for joining me. And still ahead, we'll look at the impact of Trump's new proposed tariff proposals against these three countries with Nazak Nikakhtar. She's former Commerce Department Assistant Secretary and Undersecretary. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Tariff. 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 I am a tariff man.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff.
Build your plant in the United States and you don't have any tariffs.
President-elect Donald Trump making his feelings about tariffs quite clear on the campaign trail. And again on Truth Social last night, when he threatened imposing an additional 10% levy on all Chinese goods and 25% on those coming from Mexico and Canada. I spoke with Christopher Smart, former special assistant to the president for international economics during the Obama administration, about that threat earlier today.
I think loud and clear he has broadcast his opening move in what is always a trade negotiation. You know, whether you put on tariffs or not, or threaten to put on tariffs, it is intended at least to extract some sorts of concessions from trade partners. In this case, the surprise is that it has come now, I think. And the surprise is that, or what is not clear, is exactly what he hopes to get in return.
Joining me now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Nazak Nikakhtar. She is National Security Practice Group Lead at Wiley, Rein and former Department of Commerce Assistant Secretary and Undersecretary. Here with me in our Washington, D.C. studio. Welcome back. Many have suggested, as Christopher Smart just did, that this is really a negotiating tactic. Do you believe that? And if it is, what's the end game?
Well, thank you again for having me. It's great to be here. Describing these things as negotiating tactics, I think it's selling short what the problems are. We really do have some very serious and significant trade friction with our partners, and those trade frictions can only be addressed either through the imposition of tariffs or really sitting down and having serious discussions with them. And to get our trading partners to change their practices, there has to be some leverage, and tariffs would be the leverage. But it's not just tariffs for the sake of tariffs. It's tariffs to address some real significant trade frictions that are hurting U.S. businesses and taking away jobs.
But these aren't just any three trading partners. There are three largest. Trillions of dollars of goods come into this country from these countries, many of which we rely on, and there aren't necessarily clear existing supply chains from elsewhere to make up for any friction that may cause if there are higher levies in place. So how should we expect the impact ultimately if we are to see blanket tariffs of this kind in terms of what we will see in this country as a result?
I mean, that's absolutely right. If to the extent that there is no substitution effect whatsoever, a possibility for substitution, we have to address these trade distortions. And look, Canada, Mexico, our closest trading partners, our most relied upon trading partners, which is why it becomes that much more problematic when a country like Mexico is allowing the exports of illegal fentanyl to the United States or is allowing China to circumvent the import restrictions, tariff measures we have in place to address their distortions by just building up plants in Mexico, right? So there are partners, we like them, but yes, we have serious problems that have to be addressed for the sake of the entire ecosystem, the trading bloc.
Well, and when we consider the nature of those problems, presumably the justification Trump would be using here in order to enact these higher tariffs would be on national security grounds. How loosely defined is that? Would there be any resistance potentially to this if he were trying to pursue this policy when he takes office in 55 days?
I mean, absolutely. We have tariff tools that are geared to address national security. And I think your question is really what's the nexus between national security and economic security? Yeah. When we have sectors that are so critical to the broad industrial base of the United States, the industrial base that helps flow into the military capabilities, innovation, et cetera, there is a clear nexus between the tariff measures and what we need to do to protect our national security. But there's other trade tools that we have that are meant to just address trade distortions without requiring the nexus of national security. The bottom line is we have a number of tools that can be credibly used to address some real significant problems in trade with our closest trading partners.
Well, and presumably those partners would use the tools at their disposal as well, many of which are the same, right? There could be retaliatory tariffs placed on the U.S. in reaction to this. Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, suggested as much today.
You know, that's actually that's an interesting point and something I hear often. And compared to our trading partners, we have the most flexible tools and the broader range of tools. So yes, do our trading partners have the ability to retaliate? Yes. But there's a couple of points that need to be made. Retaliation by our trading partners when we're actually engaging in good faith efforts to address distortions, right, is a problem. That also underscores that our trading partners are not really working to solve the problem or kind of playing in a tit for tat when we're working in earnest to solve real problems. The other I think the government is going to do is work with the impacted sectors to figure out what other kind of relief we can give them to make them in the U.S. to make them as whole as possible. The other point that people usually dismiss is that if a trading partner retaliates, it gives other trading partners an opportunity to step in and trade more fairly with the United States. So I don't think that it's a 1-1 situation. We do something, they retaliate, game over. We can support our industries that are being retaliated against, and we can find new markets for them.
Well, and when you describe things that the government can do to provide that support, the government consists obviously of a lot more than just the president. There will be a Treasury Secretary, presumably if confirmed, Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick for Commerce Secretary, a yet-to-be-named U.S. Trade Representative. What role do you expect all of those individuals will play in this?
You know, I think Scott Bessent is going to play an important key role in whenever industries are retaliated against, right? What economic levers to pull in the United States economy to create stability and also to help those sectors impacted through tax relief, whatever mechanisms are appropriate. The Commerce Department has a huge role in helping open up new markets for our companies that are being retaliated against. And certainly USTR is going to be in a position to negotiate some pretty critical sector-specific trade agreements that also give our companies not only relief, but access to markets where they've been shut out for a long time. I want to underscore a very, very important point. These tariffs or this talk about addressing trade issues, they don't come out of nowhere. These have been issues that have been lingering for quite a long time. American workers are being impacted, and we have an administration who's going to go in aggressively to tackle these. And I think what Trump is doing right now is just providing transparency. These are his trade irritants. This is the friction, and he's proposing now for our trading partners to be aware of. This is how he's going to tackle the problem. And I frankly think transparency is good.
All right, Nazak, thank you so much. She, of course, worked in the Commerce Department in the first Trump administration, now National Security Practice Group lead at Wiley. Rein. Nazak Nikakhtar, thank you so much. And still ahead, Israel and Hezbollah reach a temporary ceasefire agreement announced by President Biden at the White House today. Ned Lazarus of George Washington University will join with more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
We're determined this conflict will not be just another cycle of violence. And over the next 60 days, Israel will gradually withdraw its remaining forces. And civilians on both sides will soon be able to safely return to their communities.
President Biden earlier today announcing the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah. Joining me now for more here on Bloomberg TV and Radio is Ned Lazarus. He is teaching associate professor, Lazarus, at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Thanks for being here on Balance of Power. Ned, the president today described this as a 60-day agreement to start, yes, but he also suggested that it's an opportunity for something permanent. Knowing it took months to get to this point and a lot of shuttle diplomacy the U.S. had to engage in, how much harder would it be to extend this beyond 60 days?
Well, the 60 days is, I believe, meant to be a period in which the important parts of the ceasefire have to happen, meaning the fighting should stop as of 4 a.m. Israel-Lebanon time tonight. But 60 days for the IDF to withdraw from its positions in southern Lebanon, to withdraw all IDF troops from southern Lebanon, and crucially, for the Lebanese army to deploy in southern Lebanon, along with the UNIFIL, the UN protective force, the peacekeeping force that has been there for decades. And during, the 60 days is more like the period for the implementation to happen. But I certainly believe the 60 days is meant to lead to a longer ceasefire. That will, of course, depend particularly on Hezbollah refraining from continuing to launch missiles, rockets into Israel.
Well, and when we consider Hezbollah's even existing capability to do that, presumably the reason it has agreed to this deal, as well as Iran kind of allowing this to happen, is because Hezbollah has been materially weakened. As we head into this 60-day period, how much has Israel been able to accomplish in terms of degrading that threat and their capability?
In the last few months, Israel has certainly made very profound military achievements against Hezbollah, including assassinating all of its senior leadership and destroying a good deal of its, of its offensive capability. However, Hezbollah was and remains a powerful organization, and Hezbollah has demonstrated that by continuing to fire sometimes hundreds of missiles into Israel every day in recent months, meaning during this entire period that Israel has been bombarding Hezbollah strongholds all across Lebanon, and that it has suffered very serious blows. Hezbollah has still launched dozens and often hundreds of missiles into Israel's north, but also all the way into the central region. And just a week ago, Hezbollah hit a major intersection right outside of Tel Aviv. So Hezbollah has also demonstrated that it retains the capacity to do very serious damage and to shut down, normal life in Israel. I believe the 60-day period is meant to demonstrate that there really is a ceasefire to withdraw the IDF, and the turning point really will be, if we get through the 60 days, if civilians can begin to return to their homes in northern Israel and in southern Lebanon, where we have tens of thousands of people who have been living, as President Biden said today, as refugees in their own country for more than a year.
Well, and then there's the question of Gaza and Hamas. And before this ceasefire deal was announced, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, had this to say about how an agreement with Hezbollah could ultimately feed through to that conflict. Take a listen.
I also believe that by de-escalating tensions in the region, it can also help us to end the conflict in Gaza. In particular, Hamas will know that it can't count on other fronts opening up in the war.
We've just got 2 minutes left here, Ned, but do you really believe that that could be true? Or how different in nature is what's happening in Gaza to what has been happening in Lebanon?
They are different in nature, and they are also different in nature politically within Israel. The first party who would have to agree to a ceasefire and a hostage release is Hamas. And Hamas, as the U.S. government has said repeatedly, is the number one reason that there is not a ceasefire. However, it is also speculated within Israel very widely. Most of the hostage families, much of the country's security establishment feel that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been, either avoiding an agreement or creating terms that are beyond what Hamas will agree to, because a hostage agreement and an end to the war is politically complicated for him. There are extreme right ministers in his coalition that he depends on who will oppose such an agreement. One of them also opposed this agreement with Hezbollah. But it is certainly very widely believed in Israel that the prime minister has either deliberately undermined or has simply put forward terms that are not going to be agreed to. So both, it's a different animal in that sense, but it is certainly the hope of so many people, the families of the hostages who demonstrate every single day in Israel and have waited now more than a year. And obviously the suffering of the citizens of Gaza who are now entering a winter. So both the hostages in Hamas captivity and the citizens of Gaza under rain and cold weather in terrible conditions. One can only hope
Ned Lazarus of the Elliott School of
ceasefire.
International Affairs at George Washington University. Thank you for joining me here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to get your energy costs in half. We're going to bring down your energy costs.
I will be the American energy president. We will quickly become energy independent, and we will frack, 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 and drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, baby, drill, and frack, frack, frack.
President-elect Donald Trump sharing his thoughts on energy policy during his campaign. And he's also put energy in focus today with his threat last night of a 25% tariff on all products coming to the U.S. from Canada, oil imports included. Joining us now for a closer look here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Bob McNally. He is founder and president of the Rapidan Energy Group and once served as White House energy advisor to President George W. Bush. Bob, welcome back to Balance of Power. A 25% tariff on all of those energy products, energy-oriented products coming from Canada would do what to the cost here in the U.S.?
Hi, Kaylee. Well, if he really goes through with it, it'll take a chunk of change out of the pocketbooks of upper Midwest consumers and Rockies consumers. All crude is not the same. Our refiners are geared to process a very dirty, high sulfur crude that Canada sends us. And especially up there in the swing states of Michigan and Ohio, places like that, there's no alternative really to Canadian heavy oil. So if we tariff it, that increase will be passed along to motorists up there in the form of higher oil prices. There's really no way around it.
So drill, baby, drill, or drill, baby, drill more, I should say, since we're already producing a record amount of oil and gas here, Bob, would not be a solution to this potential problem.
No, I mean, that would, if we were to put tariffs on imports of crude that we need, that we're geared to run from Canada, especially in the upper Midwest, no, we'd be raising costs for consumers. It kind of go against what the president talked about, which is getting oil costs, energy costs lower. And for that, we need to improve the regulatory and policy environment for investing, not just in the upstream and the wells, but the pipelines, the refineries, et cetera.
Well, so let's get into that, Bob, because for years now, it has been a capital discipline regime when it comes to energy companies. They return capital to shareholders, yes, but they have not been investing heavily in increased production, having been burned by that before. So what would need to change in this administration to actually make that calculus different, for capital discipline to no longer be the primary name of the game?
Yeah, I think that the investors would have to be confident that we've moved beyond the risk of a collapse in oil prices. Because, the unfortunate secret is that decisions made by OPEC Plus in Vienna matter a lot more for how much drilling we do in the United States than decisions in Washington. In 2020, in 2015, we had price collapses. That's why, as you noted, Kayleigh, investors are saying, hey, give me that return back. Don't over drill. And so it's that caution born of heart of experience that has to go away. We have to be free and clear of recession risks or of OPEC Plus flooding the market again. I think that matters most.
Well, so I do wonder the kind of circular logic here. If Donald Trump wants to deregulate the energy industry to allow for more production, it's with the goal of getting energy prices down. So isn't that in return actually bad for these very same companies that would be making these production decisions? Lower oil prices isn't necessarily a good thing for them.
Right. I think the real benefit to the industry and why they're so excited about the election results is that, look, it's a long-term game. We're talking decades here. And President Trump, the Republican Congress, are going to vastly improve the regulatory environment for investing in 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And let's remember, with them coming to power, we're not going to see the risks of what we started to see in the Biden administration, restrictions on energy exports. That goes away. So I don't want to understate how beneficial it is for the oil and gas industry and for long-term supply to have the Trump folks come in. However, near term, the OPEC meeting on Sunday will matter more for how much gets drilled next year than anything we're going to do in Washington.
Well, as you talk about the Trump folks, that obviously includes a lot more than just the president. He's appointed names who will oversee roles in energy to this administration. Chris Wright, of course, tapped to be the energy secretary. And then there's Doug Burgum, who was tapped for interior, but also is apparently going to be leading this new Energy Council. What are your thoughts on those picks and the way in which they could play a role in shaping this policy moving forward?
I'm excited by them. I think they're great picks. They are going to bring real expertise. Chris Wright understands the U.S. oil and gas industry, a successful investor and operator of pipelines and so forth. But he's also an all of the above guy, as is Governor Burgum, right? Investing in wind, investing in geothermal, nuclear, and so forth. This is not just only about fossil energy. So it's unusual, really, to see, I think, this combination of real world expertise in energy. So I think it's great, and I think it's great that they're going to be consolidating policymaking in a new National Energy Council at the White House. Having worked both at the NEC, the National Economic Council, and the National Security Council for President Bush, it would have been nice to have a one-stop shop, and now they'll have it. So I'm optimistic about the appointments and the new structure.
I want to get into this kind of all of above approach, all of the above approach that you were just referencing, the idea that clean energy may play a role in this ultimate composition as well. Last week during the G20, Bloomberg's David Gura got to sit down with Ali Zaidi, the national climate advisor for President Biden. And this is what he had to say about climate change as we look towards this new administration.
I don't think that climate change is a matter of belief. It is a matter of science where there is a global and unambiguous consensus. But the Department of Energy's job is to figure out how to secure our energy future. And the way you do that is by investing in the very technologies that will bend the curve on emissions.
Bob, Chris Wright has been criticized for once suggesting that there is no climate crisis. So how would you think he would approach these kinds of questions? Knowing, yes, you just said he's an all of the above approach kind of guy, but does that belief have to be there?
Well, if you read what he's written, and he's very prolific in the media, he calls climate change a challenge, but maybe not the level of crisis that others do. So I don't think he's ignoring it. But he's saying, we have to look at ways to get emissions down that use 80% of our energy that comes from hydrocarbons. So again, it could be carbon capture sequestration. It can be nuclear power, carbon-free electricity, which we need to fund all these new AI data centers and so forth. So I think he's actually quite pragmatic, quite broad-minded about energy. And yes, I mean, President Trump on down, I think they have a different view of climate change, not that it's a nothing burger, but that it's not the kind of terrible, imminent, planet-ending crisis that others suppose it is. And let me just say, Kayleigh, I think this is going around the world. I think if you look at elections in Europe, the European Parliament, France, Austria coming up in Germany, you're starting to see this move away from sort of keep it in the ground and decarbonize at all costs to more of a all of the above, we can walk and chew gum and get cleaner, but also secure energy. I think it's going around the world, not just in the U.S.
Well, and with the world in mind, Bob, before we let you go, we did get progress today in the Middle East in terms of a ceasefire agreement being announced between Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon. Remains to be seen if we can reach one in Gaza. Then there's the question of the ongoing war in Ukraine, which obviously has had implications for energy flows as well. And I wonder, as you look at the geopolitical situation that President Trump will be inheriting, how that is actually also going to influence ultimately where energy prices are, regardless of, as you alluded to, what's happening domestically.
Right. So President Trump has said, and we believe, and his staff is preparing to impose maximum pressure on Iran. Iran's become a big oil exporter under President Biden, about 1.5 million barrels a day. And while there may be a temporary truce with Hezbollah, the Iran issue remains unresolved, and there's a reckoning coming there. Also, this is overlooked, but the media is starting to notice, President Trump and the Republicans have a problem with Iraq. Iraq has drifted into Iran's orbit over the last few years, and we could see maybe not direct sanctions on oil there, but sanctions on officials. And then there's Russia. So if anything, I think what could cause oil prices to go up next year, which would help drillers here, may be the sort of side benefit or consequence of U.S. sanctions. And I think we're going to see sanctions used as a tool to get leverage for negotiations in these geopolitical hotspots.
And got to get China involved in that as well, as they're buying up a lot of that crude from Iran and Russia as well that you're talking about. Bob McNally, founder and president of Rapidan Energy Group, thank you so much for joining me. Coming up, a look at the political implications of Trump's sweeping tariff proposals with our political panel. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
But we know from his first term in office that he's willing to deliver on his threats on tariffs to bring other countries to the negotiating table, both on economic and trade issues, as well as other matters. And I believe that, yes, he would deliver on this, but he's also using it as a lever to get serious conversations in Ottawa and Mexico City with Washington as we turn the page and have a new presidential administration.
Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance discussing President-elect Trump's threat of imposing new tariffs on our three largest trading partners, Mexico, Canada, and China. He made this threat, of course, last night in posts on Truth Social. Joining me now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is today's political panel. Maura Gillespie, founder and principal at Blue Stack Strategies and Republican strategist, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Jeannie, in these Truth Social posts, he thanked everyone for their attention to this matter. But of course, we have to pay attention when the president-elect announces policy threats like this on social media. It's like we're all back in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 all over again.
That's right. We're back to policymaking through social media. And Kayleigh, that was my favorite part when he said, thank you for your attention to this matter at the end of the second post. And I actually was looking back today, and he, obviously he was very clear about his intention to do this during the campaign, not only saying he loves the word tariff, but saying he loves that word more than he loves the word love. He call him Mr. Tariff. I mean, so this comes as no surprise that he is saying this. And, I agree with the congressman when he talks about this as a negotiating tactic. But I do think there are differences when it comes to these three nations, how you can use it as a negotiating tactic. And, just one example with Mexico, the statement by the Mexican president today is absolutely on point. We need Mexico as a partner to address the influx of migrants and drugs across the border, because we got to ship people if he's going to ship people out somewhere. So, these negotiating tactics differ by country. And that's what I'm curious to see how he manages that difference.
I also wonder why he is attempting to manage it, at least now, in part, more 55 days before he takes the oath of office. Why not wait until it's no longer just a transition, but it's actually your administration?
Part of me thinks that maybe someone just got in his ear and said, let's talk about tariffs. And he just goes to social media and does that. But I think what we've learned from those years of the Trump presidency and when he used social media, sometimes he would say things, but not necessarily follow through on them. And so, again, talking about this as a tactic, a carrot and a stick situation, trying to get what he is hopeful to get as far as border security. And I think that's where he's using it in his mind most effectively. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that will be the case or that those numbers that he put out in his Truth Social post are the numbers that it'll end up being. I think it's also is to be seen as, will this impact the U.S., Canada, Mexico deal he had during his first presidency? Does that contradict her anyways? So I think that those are some things that his team will need to look into. But for right now, it's just it's nothing to really truly weigh out because it's not being done yet. And it's just his post. It's not necessarily a policy plan in action.
Well, yeah, incredible to consider that while he talked a lot about tariffs as basically being replacement revenue for the U.S. Treasury if all these tax cuts he wants comes to fruition, that tariffs also could be used potentially to address the border. And on that note, Tom Homan, who's president's pick for border czar, was actually at the U.S.-Mexico border in Texas today and had this to say about how it plays into national security. Let's listen.
You can't have strong national security if you don't have border security. We need to know who's coming in, what's coming in, where it's coming in, why it's coming, all those questions, right? No one did better than President Trump. President Trump's one bad president to secure this border at a level we've never seen before. Illegal immigration was down to a 45-year low. Illegal immigration was down between 83 and 90%. Unprecedented success.
And Maura, this idea of securing the border, of putting tariffs in place to maybe do that, but also to protect U.S. companies, these are things that Donald Trump campaigned on. He's making good on promises here that the American people voted for.
That's absolutely true. And I think what the Biden administration has seen and a lot of Democrats are now reeling from is that they didn't take the border as seriously for a long time of this campaign. And Donald Trump seized on that. And it went too far. And I think that many in the party realized that, but it was too late. And Donald Trump is making sure that that is a priority, as he knows that between the economy and border security, the things that he won on, and that's what Republicans at large won because of those two issues. And so, and Tom Homan right there, at least the first part of what he said, we can't be the land, he didn't say it like this, but we really can't be the land of hope and opportunity if we don't have law and order, and we need to have secure borders. And because there are people here who have gone through the process and they don't want to be cut in line, essentially. And so it's really important to have the law and order, the rules being followed. And so I think that you're going to see that take shape come January.
Well, and as we consider the economy here and the way in which voters feel about it, Jeannie, consumer confidence in the U.S. This month rose to the highest level in more than a year on optimism about the economy and the labor market in data that was collected after Donald Trump won this election. So people do still believe that with these policies, he will be the best steward of the economy and their jobs and their ability to make a living.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Americans generally, when we have a new administration coming in, want to be optimistic that they're going to be able to resolve all the challenges that they've been campaigning about. And, we talked earlier about this CBS YouGov poll. Another thing it shows is that the highest priority of Americans is lowering prices. 8 out of 10 Americans say they want to lower prices. Only 1 quarter said that they want tariffs. And so the danger for Trump is not if this is a negotiating tool, but if he uses this tactic and it is inflationary, then that is going to be a problem for him and Republicans because Americans want lower prices. So, the tactic is fine, but it's the inflationary aspect. And I just go back to that statement by the Mexican president. She said, beware, one tariff means another tariff. And that's going to hurt our businesses and economies. And we need to work together to resolve these challenges. So that's going to be Donald Trump's challenge. How do you do both? Stop the issues at the border that are so important. And Moore is absolutely right. But also don't impact the economy negatively.
All right. Well, still ahead, our political panel will stay with me as we talk about another challenge, what's happening in the Middle East. Israel and Hezbollah agreeing to a ceasefire today, and we'll have reaction from Jeannie and Maura next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Over the coming days, the United States will make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and others to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. With the hostages released and the end of the war without Hamas in power, that becomes possible. As for the broader Middle East region, today's announcement brings us closer to realizing the affirmative agenda that I've been pushing forward during my entire presidency. A vision for the future of the Middle East.
President Biden earlier this afternoon talking about his hopes for the Middle East in the final few months of his presidency as he announced a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah. Back with me now, our political panel, Maura Gillespie and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino for final thoughts here on Bloomberg TV and radio. So, Jeannie, we know that Biden has been striving to achieve more peace in the Middle East for some time now and through much of his presidency. How important was today in the definition of his legacy with just 55 days left in office?
It's critically important. This is one main front in this war. To be able to see a ceasefire here, he is hoping that's a sort of a game changer as it pertains to Hamas and Gaza, that they can reach a peace deal. So it is very important. I think this is going to be very difficult for his legacy, though. Just look at the vote in the Senate. 19 Democrats last week voted to stop sending aid to Israel. This is a real divide in the Democratic Party. And so Joe Biden's going to have difficulty on his legacy, whichever way he turns. But certainly a peace deal is the right direction, at least in part.
Well, and it's a peace deal that Donald Trump will inherit when he takes the oath of office. Maura, and I just wonder how you think he may approach this differently or similarly to the outgoing president.
I think it sets the tone for Hamas to realize they don't have Hezbollah fighting that northern front. But also, I think, to Jeannie's point about what this impact is for both the presidents, history tells a different story. When we're too close to it, maybe Democrats are not going to be happy about the situation, just generally speaking. But in years to come, decades to come, I think people will look back fondly to say, yes, this is the right thing to do. And if Joe Biden can also get the hostages home before the end of his time as president, that'll also be cemented in his legacy as well. So I think this will carry on, and Trump will inherit a better situation as he gets the Oval Office in January.
Well, January is still a bit of a ways away, Jeannie. Other than this, what do you think really, in our final 30 seconds here, Joe Biden is going to be able to check off his list before he walks out of the White House?
I think he's going to be talking about trying to cement the regulations put in place that the Trump administration will be trying to overturn. I also think the Senate is working hard on judicial appointments. Those are two things that they can do before he leaves office.
All right. Jeannie Shanzano, alongside Maury Gillespie, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much for joining me on what turned out to be another busy news day in the middle of a holiday week. And, of course, for coverage of all of the busy news cycle, the Washington Edition newsletter is a good place to go. You can find it on the terminal and online, and you can find me back here tomorrow for Thanksgiving Eve on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.